Jeg tror vi skal starte. Jeg heter Benedikte Wilthagen. Jeg designer, og jeg jobber som rådgiver her på Doga. Og jeg er veldig glad for å få lov til å ønske velkommen til Designworks nummer 2. Designworks er et samarbeid mellom Grafil, IXDA Oslo, AHO og Doga. Og formålet er å ha et format hvor man kan få ut forskningsbasert blodfersk kunnskap. Det har vi som er utenfor forskningsmiljøene stor glede av. I dag skal det handle om helse. Det internasjonale markedet for digital helse, det er kjempestort. Mellom 2016 og 2025 så er det anslått å vokse fra nesten 180 milliarder dollar til 536 milliarder dollar, altså en tredobling på 10 år. Og uansett hvor riktig de tallene er, så peker det på en stor trend med enormt potensial, og i Norge så har vi en visjon om å være en del av dette. Det er en stortingsmelding for helsenæring på trappene, og kombinasjonen av helse og data stemples som en viktig bit av det som kan bli den nye oljen som vi trenger. C3 er en klynge, Senter for fremtidig helse. Det er en av de nasjonale motorene som angriper disse mulighetene. Klyngen driver forskning i tett samarbeid mellom bedrifter og forskningsmiljøer. Og jeg tror vi kan si at på grunn av AOs deltakelse i denne klyngen som forskningspartner, så utvikles og brukes designkunnskap og kapasitet til å støtte opp under klyngens innovasjonsprosesser. I dag så skal vi høre Jonathan Romm, som er doktorgradsstipendiat i forbindelse med denne klyngen, sammen med Natalia, som er assisterende professor på AHO, snakke om det nybrottsarbeidet de faktisk gjør, blant annet med å etablere en integrert, designdrevet lab for helsevesenet. Jonathan deler tiden sin mellom AHO og halogen, hvor han har vært en viktig brikke lenge. En veldig sentral rolle, og han er utdannet industridesigner fra Danmarks designskole og har tidligere blant mye annet også vært instituttleder for designinstituttet på AHO. Natalia og Jonathan, velkommen. Først Jonathan, takk for at dere er her, og vi gleder oss.
Skal vi se. Tusen hjertelig takk for en fin presentasjon. I am going to switch to English, which we will use as the language for this meeting. Thank you for coming, everyone. My name is Jonathan, and I think this new collaboration that has to do with disseminating, or at least trying to explain some of the research activities that we do at the School of Architecture and Design in Oslo here is really nice, because in many other fields as well there is a gap between research and the practical work that is done out there. So hopefully we can share some of the stuff that we are doing with you and some of the findings that we have discovered while doing it. So today we're going to talk a little bit about different things, and we are a team that will hopefully inspire you. First of all, I'm going to talk about this new model that we're trying to research, which we call the Embedded Design Lab, and how that design lab performs as part of the initiative of C3, as Benedikte mentioned, and also as part of the course, the Service Design Master course at the Oslo School of Architecture and Design. Then Palak and Vilde will show us one project that they developed this winter or early spring semester at Akershus University Hospital, which is called Dødsbra. Then we will try to engage you in some conversations about the topic of end of life. And Freya and Paulina and Alice will end up the session by showing us their project which is called Still in Control. And finally, we'll have, hopefully, some time for questions and answers. So it's going to run, and then at the end, you can ask us whatever question you would sit back with. So note down questions during the session. Okay, so this is a long title, but basically this project is about embedding design into the health and care context. And we're doing this because we think that service design or systemic service design might help innovation or might help patient-centric innovation within health and care systems in Norway. The sponsor for this project, as Benedicte mentioned, is the Center for Connected Care, which is an initiative that has been running since 2015. It's an initiative that combines both providers, healthcare providers, like big healthcare organizations. It collaborates with researchers, among those also AHO and our group. And it also engages commercial partners in order to come together. Basically, what we do is, you can take the next slide, we come together, we get some ideas of what might be possible to do. Then we try to develop those ideas and eventually, hopefully, disseminate them out into the healthcare system, both as pilots and as projects, or as or commissioning those projects from the commercial partners. So this is what CS3 is all about. It's coming together and getting innovation, patient-centric innovation, making it happen. And at the same time, we're trying to figure out how are we working with this thing. So on the bottom, there is like research activity going on. So we are trying to document and develop the way we do this collaboration together. So one of the initiatives under the umbrella of the Center for Connected Care is our project, which is happens to be also my PhD project, but I really want it more to be like a kind of, it is a project that is somehow outside me, because it's dependent on very many other people that are collaborating with me. It is about spaces for co-designing health and care. And the thing is all about service design supported healthcare change. How can we actually make that happen in the scale that is needed out there? Because we know that change is coming into the healthcare system, and we need we need these capacities as well as others to support that change to happen in a patient-centric way. But what is the thing is, it's funny, because when you look at the differences in the culture between those two institutions, they're quite significant. And I've just taken some examples here. So while healthcare is highly specialized, service design is holistic in its approach. While healthcare is hierarchic and multidisciplinary, service design or systemic service design is co-created. It's going across hierarchies and silos. While healthcare is regulated and measured, service design tends to have a very informal kind of culture and tone while it's doing its projects. So how can we bridge this gap is what this project is all about. How to integrate service design capacity into healthcare organizations. Now, it's not that service design is already interacting with healthcare organizations today, and there's quite well-known cases already. There are basically three models that are that is made use of today, and those are the consultancy model, which is maybe the one that is used most heavily, and there is, so this is basically healthcare organizations. With the big H is the healthcare organizations. They take in design on consultancy basis. And there is another model, which is more scarce, but we see a tendency for that happening more and more, is integrated in-house design capacity within those healthcare organizations. In larger hospitals in England and the United States, we already see that model actually developed and functioning. And the third most common way is outsiders. It's like basically startups or bigger companies that try to disrupt and develop healthcare services outside the already existing healthcare service system. So these models, they are operating as we speak. There is, though, kind of a radical dilemma connected to these models. One of them is that if you work as a consultancy, you can be radical because we need radical change into the system, but then you kind of have less ability to influence the long-term development. While if you operate in-house, you are most likely to be opted to become a part of the system and then work with incremental change rather than radical change. So, therefore, I'm proposing this new model that we call the Embedded Design Lab. So this is the rationale behind the initiative. And the Embedded Design Lab is a model that kind of infuses design into the system on a kind of a preliminary basis in a period of time, and it embeds design into the context, it maintains a radical view, and it creates a strong sense of ownership and infuses some creative culture. And so how is this actually looking like? We're looking at ourselves as like healthcare space invaders, in a sense. We are moving designers into the healthcare space, and this is one of the first days we were at Sunnaas, the big rehabilitation hospital right outside Oslo here, and this is how it looks like a couple of days after that, when we've invaded that space. Or you can take the next pictures, you can see. So there's suddenly, within the clinical context, there is a pop-up studio which works on the designerly premises. And and then we try to figure out what happens then. This is kind of the research part of it. And the research part is actually what I call research by design interventions. So we do these design interventions, and they are illustrated like this one. We get research input. What kind of research is it already on the topic? We get healthcare input in form of a case, some case we need to solve, some new innovative case. And then we put in design practice into that space, and we have this intervention. And then we gather a lot of qualitative material. This becomes like a field, if you want to say, and we can study that field. And the research output becomes then different kinds of publications. And also, we learn a lot from each time we do this intervention, so we can use that input to the next one we done. So we've already done 3 of those interventions. We had in the spring of 2016 an intervention at Ullevål Hospital, working with visions for the patient of year 2025 as part of the establishment of C3. We worked at Sunnaas in spring 2017, and we just finished at Ahus this spring, and you'll see some of the projects from there. And then we have another one in the planning that will run in the springtime of 2019. And so the thing is that this is a participatory research effort. So I'm totally dependent, and I'm so happy to have both people from C3, people from the healthcare organizations from the municipality level that are engaged in these interventions, but nonetheless, Natalia Agudelo and her fantastic service design 2 master course at AHU, which actually mimics this kind of model. So, Natalia, maybe you can tell us a little bit about that.
Yes. So as Jonathan was saying, what we are using is that we are building a space in which we can have designers embedded in hospitals. This is part of the second semester of the first year of their International Design Master at AHU. And basically what we're doing is that we're combining master students with people from the healthcare professionals that we're using with, and researchers. And in this case, with the project that the students are going to present later, we had Jonathan's PhD as the main brief, but we also had Frida Almqvist in her PhD that is also working with C3. So we had actually 2 research projects working in this last intervention. As a course, just to tell you basically how we work, it's a very basic structure. We do some planning, we do a lot of tutoring and adjusting, and then we evaluate, as Jonathan said, so that we can continue working and kind of improving in the next semester, knowing that we are going to have some iterations. So at the beginning, we knew that we were going to run this a couple of times. So as Jonathan mentioned, the first one was the Ullevål Hospital intervention. It was part of the C3 launching, And basically what we were doing here was learning by doing. We held 4 big workshops, 3 of them run by the students. We had the students in the hospital for 6 weeks. And the task there was to infuse the C3 project with a patient-centric view. How can we bring this different group of people together to have a shared vision? And then that's when Jonathan defined that it was going to be for the future, and then as part of his PhD. And then we run different things like the scenario workshop that you see downstairs, and then we moved to U-level. And the design solution was the students design 6 different concepts for the future in 2025. And we held an event that we called the Experimentarium, when we invite the people from C3 to this future. And then the students were doing some enactments of the different service moments that could tell them how this future could look like, not as an ideal future, but as a discussion point. Because what we aimed and what we wanted with this intervention was to have people, what is the kind of future that we want to have? Do we want to have genomics in hands of the government so that they can prepare better policies, or not? And so that was the first semester. The outcome.
Yeah, so as I told you, at the same time we are researching what's going on when we work like this. And one of the outcomes that came out of this, and I apologize for the small text, certainly for those of you who are not here and following us somewhere outside, it might be a bit hard to read, but I will explain it briefly. What we were studying was how designers facilitate events like this. So what kind of dimensions are we using as to plan and carry on with these kinds of events? Like designerly facilitation was the thing we studied. And we found out that there are 6 main dimensions that we are using as designers. We did that by analyzing all the different activities that we were doing with pictures, and we analyzed each event and each tool that were developed. And we found out that these are the 6 dimensions we are actually using to facilitate those events. For instance, in the very bottom, there's an intentional dimension. There's always an intent with an event, like this one. There's an intent. There's an intentional. Here we want to share with you some of our findings. That could be the intention. And there's always functional aspects. These are the core facilitation dimensions. There is functional. We need to have some food. We need to have enough space. Those things. Everybody needs to know when it's happening. And there is participatory. How can we actually give meaning to that we are gathering together physically, or even virtually? So these are the core facilitation, but the most interesting of those were the designerly dimensions that we discovered, and those are the creative dimensions. We always tend to try to make people produce creative material so that we can use it as part of our design process. It's the human perspective, so we tend to kind of share perspectives from different kinds of angles within a system. Within the system, it could be patient's perspectives, the caregiver's perspectives, I don't know, the premise giver's perspectives, the leadership's perspectives. All of these perspectives are kind of very present in the facilitation that we do. And finally, we have the experiential part. We try to bring in experiences. What kind of experience do people experience in their daily life? How can we mimic that as part of the events we do? So, for instance, and this was a study that was comparing both the C3 case and another case that probably some of you have seen, or even participated. It's called Guts to Change. And it's a study that I did together with Manuela Aguirre and Natalia, and it was published both as part of the RSD6 conference and also in a paper called Shiji, so we're very proud of that. So you see there's also research outcome that comes from these interventions.
So the second intervention, we moved to Sunos, and what changed here was that we understood that it was important to have more people on board to actually connect with the hospital. So Sunos approached Jonathan with enough time the fall before the semester, so we had time to plan both the space but also to have a steering committee, which meant that we managed that the hospital allocated time, at least the steering group was 16 people. with at least 9 hours during the whole semester to begin with. And those were gatekeepers that were helping the students to navigate within the hospital and actually have access to the elements that we had to face there. A second thing that we did was that we split and we made explicit for the students that there were two tasks, that there was a design task and that there was a research task. Because what we saw was that in the first one, the students were just kind of doing, and we as researchers were observing them. But we wanted them to be actually active participants in the research. That meant defining among the question of the Meta Design Lab, what was the small question that we were going to ask them to observe, and we gave them freedom to actually document among that question what was that they were doing. The tasks that we were given by SUNOS, they are in a constant undergoing renovation process, and they wanted us to use our service design skills to inform the construction of new wings of the hospital. Being such a different hospital, highly specialized in recovery, where patients can stay up to 3 months, they wanted to know what made them different. So when they had architects and opening for architects, how do you call it?
Planners.
When you have the opening for a project?
Yeah.
Procurement.
The procurement
Thank
of
you.
architects.
For the procurement process to be better informed of what were their needs. The design solution is called Viewpoints, and is 5 conversation tools about the future of rehabilitation. What made SUNOS SUNOS? And then the students integrated all the knowledge that they gathered in the project was 12 weeks, and they did research for 6 weeks. And then they also interviewed architects so that they could define something that was useful for them. And what they came up with this toolkit in which SUNOS can actually add in paper and see what they do, which is something that we service designers do quite often, is the showing organizations, this is what you're doing, this is making service design tangible for them, and this was making the experience tangible. The outcome for that one?
Yeah, so as you saw, the delivery to SUNOS was these conversational kits, so they can take these conversations both among themselves and with future architects that are going to build this new wing. But when it comes to research, we are this is still work in progress. What we are looking into is what kind of material does this way of working produce? And how is space as a material utilized as part of this material production? Because the spaces of healthcare are really not well suited for design operations. They have been designed for totally other reasons. So this is an interesting thing to actually observe and learn more about in order to make healthcare spaces more suited, or if one wants to do this kind of operations, what concerns do you need to have in terms of material production, because design is very material oriented. So we have gathered the students, they did diaries where they gathered their own annotations of materials that they're produced, and they've also analyzed what they have used these materials, how they were utilized in the space or in different activities during that intervention. So this is an analysis that is in progress, and we hope it will come out during a couple of months period or something like that.
And then the last intervention that we just finished was with Aarhus Hospital. As Jonathan said, it was run this semester that is ending up. And what we did different here was that we understood that one of the elements that made the SUNOS project very, very successful was that we had design champions within the organization. So SUNOS had people that had taken the service design thinking process, the Service Design Academy, so they knew what design was, and so they were easy connection points to the designers. And when we got in contact with Aarhus, they were curious about design, but they had never had experience working with designers. So what we did was that we had this short design project during the fall as a mechanism to explain and to kind of show how designers work and what kind of things we can do. So we had the Service Design 1 course that runs during the fall was invited, and then we didn't move the students to the hospital. We just gave them a brief among the Center for Elder Medicine,
we work like a consultancy.
Exactly, we work in the consultancy model, exactly, for 4 weeks. trying to show the stakeholders that were going to be part of the longer project, how do we work? Because as Jonathan said, we do have different practices that are sometimes counterintuitive for what the practices that they are used to do. This proved very important in our evaluation meeting that we just had, because that enabled the champion, the person who is actually pulling this project together of the Center for Elder Medicine, to be able to advocate for what the students were needing. Why do we need to talk with patients? What do we need to be able to roam around? How are we working? Regarding the research task, another thing that we did differently was that we were giving a more concrete research analytic task. So in the previous semester, we had given them the research question, but it was quite open and they could explore. And what we found is that even though it was interesting, the material that was produced, it was very diverse. So it was, as data nowadays, when we're working with it, it's harder to analyze. So we came up with a structure in which we gave them the research question, that was conversations for action, and then we also give them a framework, and in the sessions we meet every other week, every 2 weeks, we meet, and then we had more concrete tasks, analysis tasks, to work with that data. So the challenge that we had with SUNOS was to inspire the Center for Elderly Medicine that is going to be created at Aarhus. And they are going to work under 5 lines. We had worked in the fall on one of those lines, which was orthopedics and geriatrics.
During the fall?
Yeah, during the fall we worked with orthopedics and geriatrics. They have a second one that is dementia that we didn't work. So this semester we worked with multidisciplinary outpatient clinic, how to have a more integrated experience for the elderly patients. End-of-life care, which is palliative care, what do we do at the end of life, and home hospital, how they can use the resources that they have now in terms of ambulatory teams in a better way to connect with the 24 municipalities that they serve. What we had was 4 concepts. Because it's a center that is now being developed, we also gave them the future framework. And it was very interesting that the one that is running the lab chose also 2025. So actually we could use some of the scenarios that we had built 2 years ago to actually inspire the design of this future. The students presented 4 concepts. And as I mentioned, it's not only the concept, because for this semester we also had Frida, and Frida is working on what happens when service designers leave the organization, and so her research is now pointing towards service design roadmaps. So the students had developed these 4 concepts and the visions. Yeah. These 4 service visions centered where they propose how we can have services that are designed around the patient needs and not the hospital or the organization capabilities for a future. And the students also develop roadmaps for that. We're going to be presenting. We think that not only it was inspiring, but it's also something that we can do now. So that's why we're going to have these 2 projects, Dødsbra and Still in Control, are going to be the ones that are going to be presented in some minutes.
And the research outcome is also still a work in progress. Research is really the kind of thing that it takes a long time. Design is very fast. Yeah? So the research part is also, you see some of the material, the qualitative material that the students have managed to gather throughout the intervention. It consists of diaries and their own analysis of what kinds of conversations are we actually holding as part of a design operation integrated into a clinical context. So this is very exciting, and we are looking forward to dive into this incredible material. I think what is interesting here is that the students really also get a good taste of what it means to be a design researcher. So that's also a part of that.
And that leads us to our kind of findings. What we think with this model, at least from what we have tried within academia, is that we think that we're giving healthcare we call it a win-win-win model situation. Yeah. Yes. So we're bringing a new way of doing innovation, because we know that healthcare organizations do innovation quite a lot, but we want to bring the patient centricity to their table. Co-creating across units, how to bridge the silos in which they are organized, and material so that they can actually have something to show to the different parts of the organization that were in part of the process. for the research, we are sure that we are generating a lot of rich data.
A lot of data, which is fantastic. Also, yeah, hopefully we can say something about how it is to work as designers, as service designers, as systemic service designers within healthcare organization. It's really something that we need to get more formal knowledge about, because it is like the forefront of where our profession is moving into at the moment, and there's a big need out there.
And for the students, we hope that we're giving them spaces where they can actually see complex service design projects that are attainable for them, that they have experience within the healthcare context. Some of the students that we had in this course have opted to have diplomas around the topic of healthcare, or even with the partners that we have had before. So we think it's a good situation to bring students actually to work with projects more in depth, and actually to be able to be part of design research. So for the second project, the one that we had in SUNAS, one of the students is actually now taking part in the analysis that we're doing in the project. So we think it's a win-win-win situation. What is going to follow now is that we're going to have Dødsbra, and then we're going to have a small activity as part of the creation and human side of things. And then we're going to close with Still in Control, as we knew. But when we're going to have conversations about death, we know it's a topic that is not, and we're going to see that is not very common. So we're going to do a small trial on a little platform that we're going to be using. So if you're not sitting in a table and you would like to sit in a table, there are some spaces here. If you're comfortable where you are, you can stay where you are. But we want you to find a neighbor and ask that person, how is that person feeling now? And we want you to use your phones, not only to take beautiful pictures of us, but also to go to this website, paulf.com/servicedesignaho, SD AHO. And then after you have talked for a couple of minutes, we're going to give you in total 3 minutes for this, because we have a tight agenda. But you're going to go to this website, and you're going to tell us how your neighbor is feeling now. So I'm going to be the annoying one with the clock. So I'm going to give you now 2 minutes to talk with your neighbor, ask how your neighbor is feeling now, and then report that in our poll. How is your neighbor feeling now? So I will tell you when your time is running up. You can start now. Ask your neighbor, how is your neighbor?
Everyone has the URL?
Yeah, URL is there. Bra. Okay, so I hope we achieved our 2 goals, that you got to know a little bit who are you sitting with, so that you can talk about death later with them, and and that you have now our website in your phones. So, following with our agenda, now we have Palak and Vilde, and they're going to talk with you about their project, Dødsbra.
Hello. So we are presenting our project for the Center for Elderly Medicine. I am Vilde, and this is Palak.
Hi.
And our supervisors were Jonathan and Natalia, who you already met, as well as Bendik Vestlund Hegna, which was the champion that they spoke about earlier from Aarhus. Our project is about end-of-life care for elderly, and we're going to start by talking a little bit about our process. We did multiple interviews with healthcare professionals, a priest, a hospital priest, as well as the communication department at Aarhus, and patient representatives. We also did workshops, mainly to understand the current situation of end-of-life care for elderly, and basically understanding the healthcare system, which is quite a challenge, as well as concept testing with professionals and patient representatives.
From our research, one of the core findings was that for end-of-life care, the palliative ward at Aarhus has 95% cancer patients. Palliative care services for cancer patients are holistic and well-established. These include services such as social worker, religious support, conversation and support for relatives, cancer coordinator, ambulatory team, etc. In the death registry, we found that the death count for elderly over 75 years of age was around 28,000 for 2016. Out of which only 20% of the deaths were due to cancer. We know that geriatrics ward provide palliative care for non-cancer elderly patients as well, but there is no standard treatment pathway for them. So, what about the end-of-life care for the remaining 80%? Looking at the pain points for patients, they're often not prepared for their situation and are afraid of talking about it. And if they do wish to talk about it, they might not know how. The department leader at the palliative unit said, "Sometimes we will meet patients that will tell us, finally someone can talk to me about this." Relatives often don't know the wishes of their loved ones and are not prepared to make decisions for them. They might even push for more treatment that does not improve or in fact decrease the patient's quality of life.
When it comes for healthcare workers, one of the main challenges is to actually determine when a patient is palliative and when they should receive palliative treatment. This is particularly because they're so focused on saving lives. When it comes to nurses, they mention time as a major challenge and makes it difficult to actually approach the subject, or they might end up avoid talking about the patient situation altogether. The treatment for elderly patients are very much focused on the now. Like one of the ICU nurses told us, once the patient is stable, there should be a long-term perspective about the kind of treatment they should receive. We treat them for now, not for next year. We don't do that. We also know there's going to be a significant increase of elderly people in Norway. That also means that there's going to be an increase in relatives in Norway. In 2017, 1 of 9 were over 70 years old in Norway. However, in 2060, 1 of 5 are going to be over 70 years old. So after looking at this, we also wanted to look at how we're dealing with the topic of death and dying on a societal level, since this is one of the very few things that we all have in common. The social commentator and Catholic priest Halvard Ibermoen said, "We are not aware of our birth, but death is something we should be aware of, something we don't cheat ourselves out of and stay unprepared for until it suddenly puts a chokehold on us." This says something about how death was already an unfamiliar and mystified topic in 1976.
So in Norwegian society, death is still a taboo. Even in the newer Norwegian health policy documents, death and grief are almost absent. In the Act on Municipal Health and Care Services, the word death appears 12 times. That might not sound too significant, but when we look at the Act, 83 paragraphs, 13 chapters, and none of these times are about end-of-life care.
So we asked the question, what if Aarhus triggered a national conversation about death and dying? So we started off looking a little bit at the existing narrative of death, which often is this dramatic visualization. So you can see the Grim Reaper, the angel of death, this very dark black image. When it comes to elderly dying, it's a lot of hand-holding, candles, very passive patients. And when it comes to the metaphor of death, it's often about the fight. Like a doula, like a patient companion told us, she said that there is a war against death in our society, which means that we will always lose in the end. So if death is a fight, it means that it's dramatic, it's heroic, and it's something to resist. But isn't death in fact natural, ongoing, and something to be prepared for? Maybe something more like a journey.
Introducing Dødsbra, Normalizing Death and Dying, a national campaign encouraging the Norwegian people to reflect upon and talk about their end-of-life wishes. We believe it's important not to only remind people that they should talk about death, but also the fact that talking about it in itself is not dangerous. Our core principles include having an approachable and relatable narrative about death, enabling by showing examples of how to deal with the topic, and having no agenda or pushing any specific outcome. For our concept, this is our proposal, and we'll be giving a quick run-through for our main elements. Stage 1 includes a social media campaign to create awareness. Stage 2, cultural experiences to trigger response. And Stage 3, to provide support.
So to the first stage, the social media campaign. Why we chose the campaign is because it can have a massive outreach and trigger a response. We also wanted to take Ahus out of its traditional context and recognizing the fact that they are one of the main actors on this topic. We looked at some other campaigns, for example, the frivillig.no campaign, which simulated role play to evoke empathy and connection. Also the Sjekk deg campaign by the Norwegian Cancer Society, which communicated a very complex matter, and they did that very effectively and triggered action. We also looked at death cafes, which for us worked as a proof of concept. Death cafes is an international phenomenon where people come together over coffee and cake and talk about death. This says something about how people are actually interested and willing to talk about this. So what could this actually look like? We proposed using testimonials in a documentary format. And this would focus on the intimacy and relationship between loved ones in order to show what talking about death could look like and give a sense of what it would feel like.
Stage 2 includes cultural experiences, where we use storytelling to evoke empathy and trigger response. We proposed using theatrical performances to recreate stories on stage and evoke emotional connection. Stage 3 includes providing support and follow-up, where we have a website working as an archive of information showing how to help oneself going forward. So to sum up, the journey begins when the user sees the campaign on social media, gets curious about it, and attends the cultural event with theatrical performances. They participate in conversations with strangers, acting as icebreakers, it all concluding with self-reflection. They leave the event with prompts for action, which makes it easier to share experiences within family and encouraging more conversations and interest within the community going forward.
So looking at what we think could be the potential outcomes, we think that this could be a nationwide conversation, actually putting death and dying on the national agenda. And people could feel more supported, not only from the campaign, but the online archive. Oh, sorry. And also, maybe we could achieve some more cultural openness when it comes to this topic. So a question that we got a lot from our champion and other people from within Ahus was, why should Ahus be the one to do this? This might be well and good, but why us? Should a hospital really be the advocate for talking about death and dying? To which we say, of course. We can look at other international healthcare institutions. This is something that is happening worldwide. For example, the Dying Matters campaign by the NHS in the UK, the Conversation Project for the Institute of Healthcare Improvement, and the Art of Dying Well project providing more spiritual guidance by the Catholic Church of England.
We find that there's a lack of research on the Norwegian society's relationship with death and dying. And by making this a priority, Aarhus can put this topic back on the agenda, both politically and socially, which in turn only helps Aarhus be better prepared for the increasing population of elderly. So, to sum up our project, working in an embedded lab meant close proximity with the hospital and close collaboration with key actors within a major healthcare system. Being students, this setup also gave us an opportunity to challenge the brief and look for solutions which might not be conventional. Through this project, we also see that service design is uniquely positioned for radical change, especially within organizations such as healthcare, where it can be particularly challenging to be unconventional.
Thank you very much.
Am I on? Thank you. So, yes. No, you're doing it. Now we'll go about the conversations about death. And then.
Okay, so these were some of our thoughts about death and dying. And for the next activity, I would like to invite my friends Paulina, Alice, and Freya on stage. And we will be having 3 questions, and we'll present 1 question each. And you will have about 5 minutes to think about these questions and reflect on them and share with us using the link that you tried earlier. There is no right and wrong answer, and if you don't feel like sharing, you don't have to. So to begin, you will find a blue coaster on your table. Flip the blue coaster to reveal the first question. Yeah? All right. Where do I click? It's already... Oh. What thoughts do you have about death? That's the first question. Yep. All right.
5 minutes. I will be annoyed with time again. Hello? 2 minutes to go, so you can start sharing.
2 minutes to go.
2 minutes to go. Keep sharing. So, time's up. Thank you very much for sharing. We know that this is a very engaging topic, and we know that this is just the starting point. So now we're going to move to question 2. 5 minutes again.
Yeah. Is this, or should I? Yeah. Okay, thank you. Thank you for very inspiring sharings and feedback. We now want to move on to the purple coaster, and we want to take a step back and think about the time before end of life. This might be very personal, but still very important to reflect upon. So we ask, what wishes do you have for your last days? So,
Minutes. Sharing is caring. Go. Yeah. So the app failed us in the last one, so we couldn't see your answers. But we hope you had inspiring and interesting conversations in your tables. And because we know that this is not an easy topic, that's why we decided to present you this last project. So here we're going to have Alice, Paulina, and Freya telling you the last presentation that we have for the morning for you about their project Still in Control. So welcome.
Okay. This one. we know that these questions that you just had to experience are really hard, and we also know that they are usually not asked or asked too late, and that's why we try to explore them and focus on these questions. So we are Alice, Pauline, and Freya, and we will present our concept, Still in Control. Still in Control is a project exploring the benefits of empowering elderly patients through conversations about the quality of life. During our research, we found out that the patients interact with different healthcare providers, from municipality as GP to hospital. And during the last years of patient's life, he or she can be hospitalized even 5 times a year. And it's during this last phase of life when these end-of-life conversations are happening. But not only between patient and healthcare providers, but also between the patient and relative. This ends up in different pain points, not only for the patient, but only for the healthcare providers. First of all, as we mentioned before, the timing of these conversations, resulting in patient and relatives feeling uninformed and unprepared, making it difficult for the hospital to approach it as well. As we see in this quote from a patient's relative, when she mentions that she wishes that she had these conversations with her dad before her father was diagnosed with dementia, because now they can only guess what he would have wanted. Secondly, the second pain point is about patient involvement. Patients feel there is no shared decision-making, mainly based on the fact that conversations are just informative, which leads to less active patients for the hospital. And finally, as a result of all of the above, we see an over and under treatment. Patients receive too little or treatment that is not focused on quality of life, which for the hospital means that they have spent more resources on patients. So with this in mind, based on our observations, we ask if these conversations about the end of life can happen earlier. So we ask, what if we could trigger and facilitate conversations earlier? What if we could help patients plan ahead for the quality of life in the future? And what if we involve relatives from early stages? And that's why we are presenting Still in Control. So our goal for the Still in Control is to empower patients and their families to plan ahead for better quality of life by helping families to work together or to overcome changes and future challenges through conversations. The service is introduced in the hospital after a patient is diagnosed with chronic disease and while the patient is being discharged to go home. The patient is able to schedule the follow-up meeting with the nurse, which is the first part of the service, and everything from now on will take place at home. It will be followed by 2 activities that we are going to present to go through with the family and start opening up conversations about the quality of life. And finally, an optional follow-up meeting with the nurse in case the patient needs it. The goal of the meeting with the nurse are firstly to present the service and the toolkit and how everything works. Secondly, to answer questions about the condition and clear up any doubts. And lastly, support families in need of extra guidance throughout the activities. So the conversation toolkit looks like this and includes instructions, tools for first and the second activity that we call present and future life. So we also ask, why is it important to go from present to future life? And as you now experience in the activity, it might be really hard to jump in straight to the difficult questions. So that's why we want to get to there gradually, starting from reflecting on the present situation, which leads us to the first activity called Present Life.
So what couldn't you live without in the morning? These are the type of questions that we're going to focus on our first activity. So the activity, the Present Life, their main goal is to understand and have an overview of what's important for the patient and how to overcome near future challenges. During our interviews and research, we found that the question, what's important for you, is being asked in nursing homes and healthcare environment to focus on the individual. But we also found out that it's not an easy question to address or to answer. It's mainly about how you build upon it, so how you approach this question, instead of just asking it directly. Because of this, the first activity works through a folder that it's divided in different time frames, going from the daily life to weekly and yearly. By dividing the time frame, we saw that it helped focus on what's important at a specific part of the day, instead of asking an open question that requires you to reflect upon your whole life. For each section, the patient will define what do they enjoy doing the most. It's important to define even the smallest thing, because it's in the smallest thing that we can make a big difference. For example, having a dinner with his husband, or even feel the smell of coffee in the morning. In case the patient or the family feels stuck or they don't know how to answer, we added the unstuck questions to guide and support the activity. The second step is to identify if there might be any future challenges that could be affected by this condition or disease. Yes. And it's important that it's not only to identify what's in the, and finally, how to overcome the future challenges. And it's important to see that it's not only what's in the patient's hands, what's to overcome, but also what's in the family or relatives could help, and even the service from the municipality or hospital. So after doing the activity and using the unstuck question in case they need it, we also added a summary card to finalize the activity. This is a summary to note down what the patient and the family have discussed and what are the things they can help each other out with. This works as a reminder of what has been agreed on and the things that have been discussed. So as we saw before, once we have reflected already in the present life, now it's much more easy to think about the future life, which leads us to our second activity.
So, do you have any wishes about life-prolonging treatment? Questions like this and the ones you discussed previously are hard topics, but important to talk about. And this introduces the second activity, focusing on the future life. And the goal of this is to share and reflect together as a family on what quality of life means in the future, and to be more prepared for the unexpected and possible situations. Just give me a moment here. Sorry. The second activity works through 5 sets of question cards, and also the keep in mind cards. The dynamic of the activity is that everyone reads and answers questions. Here we want to take away the direct focus on the patient and be able to create a moment where everyone shares and reflects their thoughts. It's important to emphasize that in this setting nothing is right or wrong. But even though it's not mandatory to answer the questions, it's important to participate, as active conversations both inform and challenges our minds to think. As you experienced in the activity, it may not be easy or even natural to suddenly answer these kinds of questions. That is why the questions in the second activity follows a path, starting with some warmer questions to clarify the expectations of the activity, then followed by lighter questions leading on to harder topics, and then going back to a new build-up. Let's look at an example, starting from the easiest ones, such as, if anything is possible, what is the most crazy thing you would like to do? Then, followed by a harder question focusing more on healthcare. For example, if you're not able to do things you used to, and you become dependent on healthcare, what would be your biggest concerns and wishes? And coming to the hardest questions, such as, do you have any wishes about life-prolonging treatments? And some questions also include a small description to better understand the topic. Besides the question cards, there is the keep in mind cards, functioning as a wrap-up for this activity. These cards work as a reminder for every participant to bring with them, because it's important to remember that even though there are some things in life we cannot control, there are some things we can, such as organ donation. If we go back to the current journey, where the end-of-life conversations happen here, we are proposing that by having conversations earlier and having more empowered patients, the number of hospitalizations could decrease and we can focus more on quality of life instead of just the treatment. With the service still in control, we hope to see these benefits. It's for the patients to find their own voice in the healthcare system and to be able to focus more on life than on dying, and also be able to plan ahead. For the relatives, it's a deeper understanding of the patient's situation, to be able to help and support, and as a family, discuss the hard topics. And lastly, for the hospital, it's to promote empowered patients that are more active in their own treatment, and also to use less resources on overtreatment. At the end of this project, we discussed the possibilities of this service not only being for elderlies, but for everyone diagnosed with a chronic disease. And we just heard the good news that Aarhus is doing the first step to implement this service. And they are now and they are now going to pilot it with their dialysis patients. So we hope this morning was inspiring and that you experienced that the topic is both important but valuable to talk to each other about. And even though we only talked about fragments within the topic of death and dying, we invite you to take with you the coasters and continue the conversations at home with family and friends. Thank you.
We have 10 minutes for questions. Yeah. See. So, if anyone has a question, then we are going to be all here, and then I can bring the microphone. Any question? No. Here?
Yes, my name is Anne, and I work in this part of Oslo, Bydel Grünerløkka. But I just want to ask another kind of question. Do you send this to us? All the papers, the presentation? Can we? Yes. Yes. Yeah. It's been very interesting. I'm working in the community as well as my sitting partner here, so it's very interesting. This was very interesting. But of course, it's nicer to be live than to be that.
Feelings, comments here.
Thank you very much. This is so impressive. Could you tell us a little bit about how these organizations find time to work together with the embedded lab, and if that is a challenge or if it makes processes like this more easy?
That's a very good question. Thank you very much. Well, time and, of course, attention is always a big issue. So this is what we've learned through the different interventions, that it's very good to use time to prepare and introduce what design is and how design works in order to empower those we call champions or the innovators within healthcare systems. There's a lot of people who work with innovation within those systems, and to help them to understand what design can bring into that equation. So it's immensely important in this period where these approaches might not be so familiar within those systems, to use a lot of time to explain and demonstrate for those who actually want to achieve change within those systems, and just show them what are the needs for including or embedding design into their organizations, and how they can facilitate for that. So in practice, this means that we have meetings good time before the interventions are happening, where we do co-planning of the whole events, how they're going to be run, where we invite stakeholders, important stakeholders, in really early stages. So we have access to patients, we have access to space, just to get access to space within those institutions that are heavily, they always need more space. All hospitals or healthcare organizations are constantly expanding, they are under pressure. So just allocating space for, say, 11 or 15 people to work within that, within an organization is an issue. So yes, it's important to take that very seriously and plan for that, and have formalized agreements about allocation of space, allocation of time of professional healthcare givers, because if there won't be a participatory engagement in these kind of developments, I think the chance for actually getting across the conceptual part and making these things become implemented into the system will decrease a lot if there is no participation and feeling of engagement and ownership within those institutions. So it's very important.
So thank you very much for a great morning. It was very interesting and inspiring. I'm coming from Oslo municipality, Oslo Kommune, and I see that the attempting that there's a lot of money in the hospitals, you know, billions of dollars or crowns. But I think the solutions are not more space in the hospitals. The spaces are at home in a commune and where people live. So we don't have that money in the future. So if we just do like this, how we spend money now and work like now, then of course we need that money, but we haven't. We think differently, and I think the commune are a key actor in this process, and I'm not seeing them very much on those pictures here. There's mostly patients and hospital staff telling how they should work, but I think I should more focus on what community can do around people's home and the network around and the services that provides there. And I think if you take them more in those processes that you hear, and they're very important, but take them in, I think we're getting better and even better solutions in the future.
You're completely right. Thank you very much. Will the world say a comment as well? Very briefly, because of time, we didn't go into all the details, but part of the steering committee of Aarhus was, I think, 4 municipalities from their 24 that they work with. And in the process that we have the first mapping workshop where we try to have a quick understanding of the holistic situation, and then we invite the important stakeholders, and Kommune was part of that. And in all the key points, they were an active part of the steering committee, and actually a couple of the projects that are now running are being presented both by either a Kommune and the hospital. So you are completely right, and we just kind of forgot to mention their engagement in the beginning. Will, do you want to say something?
Well, like Natalia said, it's a very good point, because Norway is actually one of the countries where the least amount of people die at home, which is going to be an issue with the eldrebølgen, of course. But for example, our approach to this, when we looked at the topic of end-of-life treatment, was specifically like, why do so few people die at home? Like, why is this such a difficult scenario to imagine? And we saw that it was because of a lot of people were unfamiliar about what it means to die at home. Just because the topic in itself is so hard to talk about, and that when you're suddenly in the situation where you're actually closing in on this unavoidable thing to happen, you don't actually know what you want. So how maybe you would like to die at home, maybe you feel the most safe in there, but you don't know what the services are because you haven't actually been confronted about what it means. So that's why, I mean, maybe it seems a little bit far-fetched, but that was a lot of the reasonings why we wanted to go on more on a societal level, that people could actually be more comfortable and feel more comfortable with the services that are in their neighborhoods. And so, yeah.
Thank you. That's a great comment. I think also what we haven't shown you today. Now we've demonstrated the topic of end-of-life quality, but we haven't talked about the 2 other projects, which I think also in the introductory, when you introduced it, they were very much also geared towards how to use technology and how to integrate technology into the way we work. And one of the themes were the home hospital theme, where they were actually suggesting both also founded new experts into the care system, that where the boundaries between the specialized healthcare and the primary healthcare are totally blurred. Because how can you be actually treated with specialists at home, and how is this collaboration going to happen? So we had a lot of conversations about that blur and how important that is to include both. And I know they've actually now, on the basis of the work done, they have gone together, Aarhus, and I think it's Lørenskog, and they have got 2 grants for developing projects or pilots within that space due to the conversations that were held during the intervention. I think we have time for one last question, if there is. No, it's out. Okay. Thank you very much for coming. Great to have you.